If you didn't have a truck driving Juliette Binoche taking on a child trafficking ring this year on your bingo card, what's wrong with you? Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insight into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, you heard me right. Juliette Binoche is a truck driver in Paradise Highway, and she is fantastic in it, and she really drives the truck, as you'll hear us talk about, with today's guest, writer-director Anna Gutto. But of course, writer-director Anna Gutto was committed to making a film that is filled with a lot of realism in it about a very dire subject, child trafficking in the United States. As you'll hear, she worked with an active FBI agent and some child trafficking awareness organizations to show the grim reality of how this crime has continued to be perpetuated. Anna also did a great job of telling us how she navigated staying involved for her writing directing debut and how there's kind of a minefield that you need to cross and stay committed to your vision in order to cross it successfully. Without a doubt, this was not an easy film to make, not only during a pandemic, but it's a truck driving movie. So you're moving locations a lot, all over the state, in fact. And Anna was very forthcoming about her creative process and what it took to make this film. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, Backstory Magazine turns 10. That's right. We survived a decade and we couldn't have done it without your help. And the other good news is that we just released a new issue. Yes, issue 47, our summer issue, is live and there is so much great stuff in it. I hope you check out the table contents to see it all, but we have Emmy Awards contenders ranging from Stranger Things, Better Call Saul, Station 11, Barry, Hacks, and What We Do in the Shadows, to summer movies, to new scripts for you to read, to an interview with director John Carpenter on the 40th anniversary of The Thing. Man, there are so many great things in this issue, and I hope you check it out. If you have never read us before, you can, of course, test drive us over at backstory.net and read the free issue, or you could use the iPad app Backstory, where you could read the free issue there as well. And if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could consider becoming a subscriber. And to sweeten the deal, I want to give you discount coupon code SAVE5. That will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. The code will work at backstory.net and you enter it there in your checkout cart, but it'll give you access to both backstory.net and the iPad app as well. So, it's 2 for 1. You get access to both easily. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube channel, which is all these Zoomcasts go of these interviews. So you could see us do the interviews. You don't have to just hear us, but it would really mean a lot to me to have you subscribe to my passion project. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our conversation with Anna Gutto about her debut feature film, Paradise Highway, which is in theaters. So check your local listings, and you could also find it on demand as well. Okay, Anna, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Nice. I'm glad you asked me to come. I'm happy to talk with you.
Well, so I want to give people a baseline on you. And you had the good fortune of having 2 parents who are artists. Talk about kind of your initial drawing to the arts as a child.
That's an interesting question. My father does visual arts and my mother does ceramics. My dad did visual arts. Those are both very solitary arts. And for me, it was always about telling stories and using words, telling stories and interacting with an audience in theater first. And then obviously went over to film more recently. But obviously the inspiration of having parents who are artists means that I grew up always talking about art and always talking about what I see and what they saw, and about form and aesthetics and about composition. That was a part of conversation all the time. And that has definitely been formative for me, just being, the same way I'm sure that the kids of accountants get trained to kind of be really good at numbers. I was trained at being really good at noticing shapes, noticing good composition, colors, noticing everything around me, and also noticing the stories in it. In particular, my dad was not very good at leaving work behind. So it was always work. So every vacation was, we would always go around. It was probably not a museum in Europe I haven't seen, or even if we were traveling, around in the countryside, he would stop and he would be like, look at how the light is hitting that wall and how these cobblestones are, how they are formed to really make this road. And so it was always be talking about materials and about light composition. And yeah, I mean,
That's
that
awesome.
obviously trained something in me for sure.
You served as a artistic director at 2 theater companies in New York City, and obviously, you have a great grounding in theater. Tell us about that experience, and also what you learned about the dramaturgy process for discovering new playwrights, which is always something impressive to do as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, creating theater companies in New York City was a part of. I was working as an actor, and I always loved also helming stories and making them happen. And so then creating theater companies and kind of, New York is such a dynamic scene for creating new work, but also for bringing plays over in translation. So there was a very famous Norwegian playwright at the time, and he's still famous actually worldwide. His name is Jon Fosse. And so we did the US debuts or the US premieres of his works. And it was a fascinating work, when you introduce a new playwright that really has a lot to contribute, and you introduce him to a new audience. It's a fascinating process, and it's especially with the translation and kind of working through that process, both with actors and with directors and with everybody. It's fascinating.
Well, it's great to have that theater roots, but you also consulted on 3 seasons of Boardwalk Empire, a show that I absolutely love. Tell us about what some of your big learning points were on that series, because that's kind of you getting your feet into the water for film.
I think it was probably that experience that really made me feel that chances are this is where I would belong. And in my position, because I was consulting on everything that had to deal with the storyline of a character that was Norwegian, which is where I'm from.
And just for our listeners around the world, it's where you are right now today. So thank you for staying up.
I am right now.
Thank you for staying up late to talk to us, by the way. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. No, of course. It's no problem. It's actually dark outside, which doesn't really happen in Norway at this time of year. But yeah, so and what was great was because I was consulting for this character, I would be sitting right behind the director and script supervisor every time. So it gave me like the absolute most intimate access to that work, which is rare because normally that's a very intimate space.
Sure.
And I was allowed into that. So and that show also ran, it ran so smoothly. Everyone who worked on that show, my impression at least, was that people were so happy to be on the show and really loved working on it. So it was such a good introduction into seeing how a good set works.
It was a great show, and that's awesome that you had that experience. You then went to get an MFA from Columbia. Tell us about that decision to, with your prior experience, decide to go to school.
Yeah, I mean, school is such a privilege, at least for me. I felt like, so with, having done theater, and then I always knew that I would be a director when I grew up. That was kind of, whenever you grow up. So when I started directing more in theater, I realized that theater was actually not the right place for me as a director. It wasn't the right medium. So then I made a short film.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but why not? What when you're so passionate about theater, what did you find wasn't great about directing in theater?
That's not to say that I would never direct for theater. I might, but theater, in the end, even if you work very visually, which obviously the best theater is very visual, but you still kind of need to have it in the dialogue as well. Like even if you show it visually, it also kind of needs to be said. And obviously there are some exceptions, but if you want to work with narrative, which is what I like, then generally you need to also have it in dialogue. And I felt like that was limiting me. And maybe it had to do with the visual kind of upbringing I had, but I felt like I wanted to work more visually. So that's what really drew me to film when it comes to the artistic side of it. There is also another side that has to do that when you do theater, you're reaching a limited audience. I mean, first of all, just because it's limited, more limited in the amount of people who can come in, but also because it tends to be the same people who go to the theater. And it tends to be the same people who read the same newspapers as me and sees the same shows as me. So we kind of already have the same opinions. And I was starting to get a little, I wouldn't say frustrated, I was starting to get a little tired of that. And, I was an exchange student in Indiana when I was 16, and it was an incredibly different environment of anything I had grown up with and of my, 16 years in New York. And I wanted to reach those people. I wanted to tell stories that people can watch all over the country and all over the world, ideally. But I wanted to have the possibility, especially now with streaming, etc. I wanted to have the possibility of where stories can reach people who otherwise wouldn't have access to them.
Absolutely. And that's great. And so you decided to go to film school to kind of solidify or get your footing, basically?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I felt like, okay, I want to make this transition and I want to do it in a serious way. This is something I want to give to myself. I'm not saying everyone needs to do that, but for me, I felt like if I'm going to set aside 2, 3, 4 years, then what's the most efficient way that I can gain the most experience as a filmmaker? And also I knew that what I really needed, because I felt like I had a lot of visual background, but I felt like what I really needed was to really learn how to write a good story and how to write a good script. And that's also, that's why I only applied to one film school, which was Columbia, because I knew that from what I had heard, I felt like the writing program, even though I was there as a directing major, I knew that it's a place where I would get really good training in just knowing how to write a good script. And then it's still hard to do, of course, but to have that grounding. And that's what I wanted. I also didn't have a master's. And I thought, hey, why not? But it was really most of all like a gift to myself of saying, okay. And then I got a scholarship. Otherwise I wouldn't have done it. Otherwise I wouldn't have afforded it.
That's fantastic.
That's another side of the story for sure.
That's a definite way to go. And, you in 2016, you got the Zacky Award for Excellence in Screenwriting for Paradise Highway, today's film. And I'm just kind of curious. We have a tough truck driver with her brother in prison, and she's run some packages for him. I'm only saying things that are non-spoiler section that are in the trailer. And then the newest package that she is told from him in prison to run turns out to be a young girl. Yeah. When did you come up with the idea for what became Paradise Highway? And tell us about that writing experience that won you an award.
Well, I think with stories that end up being good stories, there are always many elements that come together. So like with this story, I would say there's probably a seed of why I wanted to write this story that happened already when I was a teenager. And it turned out that there had been a brothel in my friend's building. Whoa. And this was not a bad side of town. This was a nice neighborhood, just like yours and mine. It was just a regular neighborhood. And it really shook me, and it made me so aware of what happens right under our noses. It also made me aware of choosing to see what's around you and not.
Was this in New York or Norway?
This was in Norway, in Oslo, which is kind of even more shocking, at least at the time. And then, living in New York and just seeing how it really happens everywhere, and realizing how much it happens also with domestic children. Yeah, and adults, obviously, also. So that was there. And then, moving to New York and living there, and seeing and just realizing how trafficking was becoming more and more prominent. That was huge. And then I was in the middle of having my first child. I wrote the first treatment before I had my first child, while I was pregnant, and then I wrote the first draft right after he was born. So there is also a very kind of personal, yet very different, but sort of personal story of becoming okay with being a mom. And I wanted to be a mom, so it's not that. But there is, I think for a lot of parents anyway, there is both like an incredible joy, but also a lot of like fear of having that responsibility for another person.
Sure.
And a vulnerability, that comes in when you're that close to another person. So there is some of that came in there. And then I was so lucky at Columbia to have one semester with Paul Schrader, who, of course, with Taxi Driver, etc. And he, when I was working on this treatment, he was like, well, Anna, there is this, because then the story had started being at a truck stop. And then he was like, I've seen this YouTube video of this trucker woman. I think you should take a look at it. And, it might be a character for you. And then I did. And then I started researching female truckers. And I became friends with particularly this one woman, Desiree Wood, who ended up in my movie as a character, acting in my movie. And I started getting to know her. She invited me onto these calls that she would have with her trucker friends, and where they would be talking for hours. And I would sit in my little apartment in New York, listening in on these conversations. And I felt like I was on the road with them.
In the movie, they do it on their phones. And you always think of truck drivers doing it on the CB radio. Do they just consider the phones obviously more private because no one else can listen in? Yeah, that totally made sense.
Yeah, I mean, the radio, and actually, like, since then, I've gotten to know a lot of truck drivers, obviously, and most of them say they don't really use the radio a lot anymore. They mostly now use it just for like traffic or wondering about if there are people at the way station, things like that.
Right.
But kind of the personal talk, the way that we remember it from Smokey and the Bandit, like that's more so over the cell phone network now when they have that,
Yeah.
And especially for these women, these conversations are very intimate. So it was really wonderful that they invited me in because they really talk very intimately.
I love that it was Paul Schrader that gave you the idea to have a truck driver character. He's a hero. I love that guy. So tell us about the title. When did you come up with the title of Paradise Highway?
That was actually a good while later. That was, I would say, a couple of years after I graduated, or maybe just a year. I'm not sure. But
okay.
I mean, Highway obviously is quite, there's something about these women who were on these calls, these trucker women. I gained so much respect for them. All of them have traumas in their past, and they made these choices to make a different life for themselves. And Sally, the character that Juliette Binoche plays, also makes a choice to make a better life for herself. And that is Paradise Highway, because a highway is never just paradise, right? But you choose your own paradise and you choose which road you want to be on. And then that becomes your paradise.
That makes sense.
Something like that. And also it just felt right. It just felt right for the movie. I think that's actually the best sort of answer to your question, is that
it works. It's just there's so little paradise in the movie. You know what I mean? Like, you really got to strive to get there towards the end. I won't say anything because
I see what you're saying. But in a way, as soon as there are certain characters, as soon as they start connecting, it starts being paradise.
Yes,
because
it starts out hell for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess.
I want to talk about your creative writing habit for a second. My first question is, how important is outlining to your process? You said that this started with a treatment. Tell us about that early iteration. How long was your treatment? How many pages was it?
It depends, really. But I started out with, it's so long ago now that I can't remember like what I did first. I mean, normally I will start out with, I will just kind of write. And then the way that I often work is actually that I write treatment interspersed with scenes. Like if I'm doing it just for my own process, I will write treatment and dialogue and scenes with each other. So when the scenes come and are kind of clear, then I start just writing it as scenes. And then when it's less clear and more just in thoughts, then I kind of just write the thoughts, and it goes back and forth between that. But again, Paul Schrader had this great actually exercise and tool actually was, he said, once you have 60 good scenes, then you have a movie. So he said, write down, and he just had it just one sheet of paper and split it in two, and like 30 lines on this side, 30 lines on that side. And then you have 1, 2, 3, all of them, and you write just these like moments in the movie. And then, so I often work that way a lot too, because it's nice. It just kind of crystallizes the moments and kind of crystallizes what the story is.
I'm a little surprised that he told you to split it into 2 rather than the 3 sections for the 3 acts.
It wasn't about splitting it up, though. It was just about fitting it all on one sheet of paper.
Okay.
That was his point. His point was like, it should fit on one sheet of paper, and then the rest is in your head. But I mean, obviously, but for me, I use that tool. I use a bunch of different tools, but for me, I go back and forth. And then like this script has probably been through, I would say, 10 or 15 page 1 rewrites.
Wow.
And then I don't know how many revisions on top of that, 50, 60. I don't even know how many revisions. Sure. So then I would have a script. Then I realized, okay, this and this doesn't work. Then I would go back to treatment and I use sequences, definitely use often 8 sequences, but between 8 and 12 sequences, and kind of break it down into that, and then go back to script again. And really
8 or 12 sequences, is that per act or per film?
Per film.
Per film.
Per
okay.
film.
But so 60 scenes with what Paul Schrader said, and then 8 to 12 sequences. I kind of like the way that you're breaking this down so methodically. Were there any other numbers that were important to you in that outlining phase? And how long did you outline for?
Again, because it was back and forth. So like I did that first outline, I remember like in the fall, and then I had my baby and I was, baby. And then I went back to school again. And then I wrote the script in the spring, the first script. Okay. And then I did a page 1 rewrite that same spring in like May.
Okay.
So then I did a treatment stage between there. So I've gone back and forth many times between script and treatment, script, treatment.
How many drafts would you say you went through before the draft that you submitted to win your Zacky Award for screenwriting?
It was probably through like 5 page 1 rewrites.
Okay.
And then a number of revisions, probably something 4 or 5 page 1 rewrites.
What was inspiring your page 1 rewrites? Was it notes from friends or teachers, or just your own instinct that you wanted to start over?
All of the above.
Okay.
There's lots from the first draft that's still in the script. But for me, it's just sometimes a nice thing to write from the beginning, because otherwise it's so easy to keep being stuck in some bad mistakes that I made. Sure. I often find it easier because otherwise if I start using the script, the draft that's there, then I find myself more so holding on to things. Whereas I find it nicer to kind of put that just aside and start writing again, because then the things that were good from that draft will come in again, because that'll then automatically kind of make its way into the new draft, rather than getting stuck with the bad mistakes that I had made, if that makes sense.
It does. That's an interesting way to look at it. You're counting on that muscle memory recall of keeping the elements that are important and letting yourself be open to new ideas coming in. So that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I do believe in that. Just like, when you're telling a story and get interrupted and then like you forget about it, then I'm also like, well, then clearly it was not a very good story, or like clearly then it wasn't important, if I forget about it. Like, I think the good things you remember and they kind of make their way in, and maybe in a better way.
When you sit down to write, how many hours a day do you give yourself to write, or do you try and hit a specific page count?
Since I had kids, my time is very limited.
Sure.
So then it would be to write whatever time I had. I think it would more often be that I had to reach a certain page count because I had to turn in a new draft, for example. So like I had to hit 10 pages a day.
Wow.
Or I had to hit something. That is one thing that you really learn having worked in the theater, is time management and discipline. Because when you work in the theater, that curtain is going to go up at 8:00, no matter how you feel that day. And that discipline has been just golden to have with me when I've been writing, because no matter how I would feel, or if the day was not knock on wood, like I've never struggled with writer's block. And I think
that was going to be my next question.
No, but I think I can thank that discipline a lot for that, because when you're in the theater, I mean, I know in film too, once it's ready on set, you have to be ready. But in film, it can be flexible. On the stage, that curtain goes up, and if you're not ready, the audience is still there.
Yeah.
I'm super grateful for that discipline.
That's great. So you won the award in 2016. Tell us about the path of development and raising the funds to get the film made, and especially your casting of Morgan Freeman, Juliette Binoche, and of course, Frank Grillo as her brother.
It's funny, like now when you say the names, I'm still like, wow, is that really my movie?
And it's your directorial debut. That's your first movie.
Yeah.
You had directed short films before that, but that's an impressive directorial debut. So tell us about that path. So
2016, and then, years go by, but I was really actively working on making this project happen every day especially from 2016, for sure. And then I know my agents kind of sent it out to some people, and people loved it, but it wasn't as interesting for them that I was going to direct it. So they could have definitely picked up the script and run with it. But me being unproven, that was tough.
Did you get agents because you won the award as an unproven writer director?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Off the script, and because I won the award, it gave me some meetings. I probably wouldn't have had those meetings if I hadn't won that award. Then I had a short film that we decided to put into Cannes Short Film Corner, which is kind of like, it feels like it's not like expected that anything comes of that,
Right.
But my producer of another short film, she had gotten us onto this party that Silver Reel, this British production company, had, on a yacht in Cannes, because that's what you do in Cannes, right? And then Claudia, who's the head of that company, she was like, we've been looking for a project that deals with trafficking. Why don't you send us a script? So I came up, I had borrowed an apartment from a friend of mine, an hour up in the mountains. And after driving up there, and I was totally car sick and everything, at like 1 a.m., I still sat down. I was like, okay, let me send it now, because if I don't send it now, I'm not going to remember. So I sent it off. And then at noon the next day, I get this email saying, we've read your script. We love it. Can you come back to the yacht tonight at 9:30? So I came back to the yacht at 9:30.
Just so you know, that is one of the fastest experiences I've heard of somebody reading a script after you sending it, because usually it can take weeks or months. So kudos to you on that.
Well, kudos. Yeah, I guess, because they started reading and wanted to continue reading.
Yeah.
And kudos to them. But then obviously there was still a long process, because right. But they loved the script, and like they all loved the script, or I don't know, at least the ones who told me they really loved the script, and they felt like there was something really good in this script. And I was very clear with them that I wanted to direct, and they felt like it was worth to go on this journey with me. And that's quite incredible. And then there were new rewrites, notes from them and development with them. And they have a great dramaturge that works with them. Her name is Carol Griffiths, and she's great to work with. And I also have my team of colleagues, that I keep kind of working on scripts with. I set up a little writers group also in LA, where actually now Olivia Newman, who just premiered Crawdads, she was in that group with me, and a few other sort of writer directors. And so there I worked on it. So it's, I have several people, but also Silver Reel, like they were heavy in the process of like really pushing the script further. And then I got a cinematographer on board, and he had a while after I had gotten him on board, he told me, he had worked with Juliet like 10 years earlier. So by then he felt kind of comfortable enough with me that he sent her the script. And then she happened to be on a road trip in the US while she was reading. So wow. She later told me, she was like, Anna, I opened the script on my phone and I was reading here about this landscape, and then I was looking out the window and it was the same landscape, and I thought, I'm just gonna have to do this movie. So it was really,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, so that's just luck that she wasn't working and she had time to read, and that she was kind of in these circumstances, and then she liked the character, of course, and the script. So you got to have like a ton of luck, and then you got to kind of have the script that then's worthy because the hardest thing is to get people to read,
Yeah.
And then Frank came on board, and obviously Juliet then has a great draw. Everyone knows that she's just an amazing actress and that she's amazing to work with. And I know for Morgan too, he wanted to work with Juliet. Of course, and also he liked the script.
Well, and I think obviously the draw of working with Juliet here is, she's playing a truck driver, which is a role that people do not envision her in that often. So it was a transformative role for her. It was great.
I mean, she's an incredible actress, as we all know. She's also a wonderful human being. But for Juliet, it was a transformational role. And she came over to the US, over a year before shooting, and started to learn how to drive a truck.
I was going to ask that later. Yeah. So she really is driving the truck.
She really is driving the truck.
That's great.
She's not driving the truck in the big landscape shots and all of that. There are things we did with second unit, but she is driving the truck. And I mean, you can't avoid it in that, like the second shot in the movie where the camera goes up on the side of the truck, and then we turn in and she is the one driving. Like there's no way to fake that. At least not with the kind of money we have. I'm sure if you have millions of dollars, you can fake that. But
it seemed like she knew what she was doing, and you utilized it well for all the, pulling into parking lots, pulling out of parking lots, starting to get on the road, those close-ups, they worked perfectly, and they helped sell that she was driving, especially when you put the camera inside the car as well. That was great that she did that.
Yeah, no, she's just awesome. So obviously we had a stunt coordinator on board with us, and someone who's really good at driving, and particularly with 18-wheel trucks, this guy Keith Adams, and he was amazing. And he, at a certain point we were like, okay, And the producer in particular were nervous, like, can we let Juliet drive? We need to make sure it's safe. And obviously she couldn't drive on like an open highway like that she wouldn't, that's not legal because she doesn't have her CDL. But right. But he drove around with her for a while, and he came back and he was like, Anna, and he said to the producers, you guys can use her for anything. She really, really knows what she's doing. So that was amazing. And she really did. She's driving a lot in this movie.
What were some of your influences? What were some of the influences filmically that helped you as a director and also as a writer when you were writing it?
I have to admit that Thelma and Louise was a good inspiration.
Sure.
It was an early inspiration for me, and it's a great movie. And I don't know if you noticed, but the truck has the exact same color as the Thunderbird in Thelma and Louise.
Yeah, it is that blue.
Yeah, it's the exact color. So it's a little homage to Thelma and Louise for sure. Other movies, I mean, I remember also, like, in the writing process, I also sort of broke down Bonnie and Clyde, I remember, because I was curious about kind of how they had used especially for the, like, criminal investigation, that hunt, because that was also a movie that didn't have, where that was sparse, but still very present. I always like to kind of free myself from inspirations too, because the more, like with this movie, the more this movie was taking form in my head, the more it was its own movie. Then it wasn't about going back to look at other movies anymore.
Sure.
But then it was about finding, like, how can I get even closer to what this movie needs to be and wants to be?
Well, so any directorial debut, it's not easy to raise your budget and schedule. What did your budget and schedule end up being? Because it's great that you got to hang on to the project. No one tried to weave in a different director with your script.
People
if they did,
tried.
Please tell us. Yeah.
If
you want to tell us the story without naming names, we're happy to hear.
Yeah, no, there were definitely, I mean, once Silver Reel came in, once the producer came in who did the movie, I was so clear. And by then I said, I just need you guys to know that there's no way that this script is happening without me.
That's great.
So that's something that, you just need to know that from the get-go, because I can promise you it's not going to change and under any circumstances. But before that, I'd been through a few kind of processes with production companies. And I remember particularly one where I had been clear with them too, but they were still kind of like, yeah, you can totally direct it. But I was kind of feeling there's something off here. And then they had me do rewrites for them and, like, things that, they wanted differently. And then once they were, like, happy with the script, they came back to my agents and said that I would have to be open to that. They couldn't take it on unless I would be open to someone else directing it if they couldn't get it up with me. And I knew if I agreed to that, then that's what would happen.
Right. That would end
because of course, like, you can't really get it up with me unless that's the only way to get it up. And I knew that, but I really then I had to take, and I mentioned before this writing group I had in LA, and remember discussing with them, and it was a really tough decision because I didn't have anything at that point. And I hadn't made anything. I hadn't, later I did this co-directing on this Netflix show, which kind of, at least I had something to show for, but right. I didn't have anything at that point. So it was really a tough decision.
I want to talk contractually actually for a second. So they're having you do rewrites. Had you signed something like an option? Were you able to get out of it? Or was it really just kind of verbal agreements?
I hadn't signed anything yet at that point.
Because that's the danger, is that if you had signed something with them that had a loophole that they could go to another director, unless it was in that contract, that's really the only way for younger writer directors, for their first time project to stay involved, because if they give up that right in writing, it's gone.
Yeah. And so that's what they wanted me to do. And that's when I then pulled out, because they wanted that to be a part of the option agreement. Again, with Silver Reel, I was so clear from the beginning that, and whether it really came up for them, I don't know, but they were very supportive the whole time. But obviously that was then essential in the option agreement, that it was stood very clear that I was going to be the director for this movie.
As long as the cast is okay with you, and you're casting and the cast is responding to your script,
Mm.
it is also your cast that gives you that stamp of verification that you need to continue moving forward. Because if you could say these actors have agreed to act in this film with me directing, it's kind of hard for anybody to rain on that parade.
Yeah, but I think also there it was the right thing to do that I had been so clear.
Yeah,
Because for actors
absolutely.
also, I mean, for actors, it's a huge risk to work with someone who's not done it before.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people freak out on set, and I mean, being on set doing a film is very, very challenging, and so it's not easy for actors to say yes to a first time feature, because their job as actors is so hard. I mean, being an actress is so difficult.
Yeah.
And then to do it with someone experienced, of course, feels safer. So I think if I hadn't been so clear and just non-negotiable on that, some of them might have brought it up too. They maybe would have, when they read the script, said, I love the script, I want to do it, but I only want to do it if there is a more experienced director. But being that I had been so clear, that wasn't an option. So that was never it was never on the table. But then you're right, like once they were then on board and they chose to trust me, which is huge from Juliet, who came on board first. It's huge that she said, okay. But she then emailed, obviously, the cinematographer, John Christian Rosenlund, and she emailed him and said, what's your sense? And do you think she can do it? And by then he had come with me on location scouts, and we had so he, apparently he felt that I could, but trust is so important. And when you haven't proven yourself, then you need to prove yourself.
Yeah. And I'm glad that it worked out, obviously. What was your budget and schedule?
I can't really speak 100% to the budget because I actually don't know exactly where it ended up. But
okay.
But the number of days will tell you a lot, So we had a 25-day schedule.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, but it's quite crazy for this movie because you have tons of driving, and driving is very time consuming, and not just with a car, but with an 18-wheeler. So 25 days, I mean, Mary Kerrigan, who was the AD on this, she did just an incredible job with being able to schedule this and being able to schedule as well as she did with like time of day. And she did just, I don't know how her brain works or managing to put these puzzle pieces together, but she somehow created, she did magic with that schedule. We did have some drone shot pickup days. And then we had a transportation accident with one of our trucks.
Oh, no.
Which means we lost a lot of time. So we had 3 insurance days.
What happened with the truck?
We shot the first 2 weeks in just outside of Jackson, Mississippi. And then we were shooting the last 3 weeks in Clarksdale and transporting the truck from Jackson and up. The driver who transported one of the trucks, because we had one truck that was the Hero truck that was the full 18-wheeler. And then we had one that worked more as like a studio, but it was on wheels, like a studio on wheels, kind of.
So another truck is moving it so you could move your camera around, film your interiors. You're basically on a flatbed of another truck, right? That's what you mean.
It was like a self-driving vehicle. It wasn't on another truck. It had like a little, almost like a go-kart that was attached to it, that was driving it.
Wow. Okay.
That was driving sort of the flatbed. But yeah, so that was driving it. But then being transported, it had to be transported on the flatbed of another truck. And in that transportation, the driver drove under and over under a bridge that was too low.
See, and if Juliette Binoche was driving that truck, everything would have been fine. She would have known better. Been fine. So you should have had her drive it.
Yeah, exactly. So 25 days, it was really the schedule on the movie.
Ooh, hey kids, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you that Backstory just turned 10. That's right. We've made it a decade. We're here. We've survived, and we couldn't have done it without your help. And, we want to keep doing it. So your support means everything to us. And now is a perfect time to subscribe because we just released our big summer issue. That's right. We have Emmy contenders ranging from Stranger Things, Barry, Better Call Saul, What We Do in the Shadows, Station 11, and Hacks. We also have summer movies. We have an interview with actor Glenn Powell, who plays Hangman in Top Gun Maverick. We have John Carpenter, the director of The Thing, on its 40th anniversary. Looking back, there are so many great articles to read in Backstories. Huge summer issue. There's also scripts to read. I know you'll dig it. If you've never read us before, you could, of course, test drive us by reading the free issue issue, which you could find at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And look, after you check us out and test drive us, I hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber. And just to sweeten the deal, I want to offer you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. All you got to do is enter that code at backstory.net, and it'll get you access to both the iPad login and over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop as well. Look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of all these Zoom casts. That's right. You could watch us do these interviews because they were Zooms that I've put on YouTube on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would really mean a lot to me to have you support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now let's return to our conversation with writer-director Anna Gutto about her debut feature film, Paradise Highway, which is in theaters and on VOD, so check your local listings. Given your experiences in the theater, did you have a formal rehearsal period before you started filming?
Yeah, with Juliet, we kind of had conversations many times in between and talking through. And then she came in because she wanted to get back into like the driving of American trucks and all of that. So she came in several weeks before we started shooting. And she would have probably come in months before if it was possible, but it was COVID times and everything. But she came in several weeks before shooting. So we started kind of working our way just through the script, discussing and talking about the scenes. And then Hala Finley, who plays Layla, the girl, she came in, I want to say maybe 10 days before.
Okay.
So then we would have, I would have a few hours with them every day. Obviously by then there's so much other stuff that I had to also tend to, but yeah. I had hours with them every day, and we worked our way through their scenes. But when it comes to film, I believe in rehearsal in a different way than in theater, because you're not trying to get a finished result that then is repeated night after night. You're more so trying to prepare for finding the sort of immediate inspiration once you're ready to shoot the scene. So I more so believe in kind of working our way through the scenes more. But, at times we would quite rehearse them. It depended a little bit on the scene, but we would work our way through all the scenes. And I also did the same on Zoom with Frank. Like we also worked our way through all of his scenes. And with Cameron, we didn't have as much time. And with Morgan, I didn't have any time, but I didn't need any time with Morgan. And it's also, but Juliet also loves rehearsing, which was really lucky for me.
That is great.
Because then that kind of forced that, I don't know that I would have gotten that privilege if it was a wish that was only coming from me.
Well, your directorial debut is also during a pandemic. So, on the one hand, you have a lot of outdoor shooting, which is good.
Yeah.
You have people in pairs, which is good. You have, Morgan and his partner. You have the two girls in the truck. So, you have ways to create little bubbles, I think, that totally worked. What was something that was really important to you during shooting during the pandemic, a new skill that you picked up, or part of your COVID protocols that you want to tell people about of what it's like to shoot these days?
I was just really glad that we were shooting outside as much as we were.
Yeah.
Because you need an intimate communication with your actors and them with each other. I always want to be very close, and I'm not saying close in their face, but I want to be close to what's happening in front of the camera. Very rarely do I sit at Video Village because I just don't feel like I have time. So I'm usually on a smaller monitor that I carry so that I always can be kind of close to where the camera is and really close with the actors. So if we had been shooting inside, I probably wouldn't have been able to do that as much. But because we were shooting outside, it was possible for me to kind of be so involved.
Obviously, a lot of shoots, when they have a location that they're kind of basing their shoot around, or if it's a soundstage shoot, it's easier to kind of isolate people and keep your crew safe. But you're moving a lot. You're on the road going different truck stops, out in the woods, stuff like that. Was it difficult to keep your crew kind of bubbled and safe when you have a company that's moving?
I felt like it was a huge challenge for the production going in. And I think everybody was, I was worried for people's safety because you want everyone to be safe.
Yeah.
Now, everyone in our crew were vaccinated.
Great.
So that I think helped us a lot. We didn't have a single incident the shoot, which was very lucky. But I also, going in and being worried about people's safety, I also had to just trust the COVID team. And we had a very good and tested COVID team. And the way that I saw they were operating, I felt like they were doing a good job. And then I had to also just trust them to make sure of the safety on that, because I had a lot of other things to think about, first of all, but also that's their profession.
Yeah.
And they know that. I also tried to not really get involved with their work and really let them do that and trusting them with that.
Well, we have run out of time for a non-spoiler section because we have got to talk about the spoilers. So, folks, if you have not yet seen Paradise Highway, please press pause, go see it. You could find it on VOD. You could find it in a theatrical release as well.
It's coming out in the theaters, and it's going to definitely be at the Lumiere in Beverly Hills in Los Angeles. And then it'll be at Cinema Village in New York City, 4 shows a day, at least for that opening week. So if people can see it in the theater, they should really, really see it in the theater.
Absolutely. And it looks great on the big screen, I am sure, because you have these wide, beautiful panoramic shots of the trucks outdoors, all the things that are going on in these beautiful landscapes. So it's definitely a big screen kind of movie in a way too. But so press pause, come back to hear the spoiler section, because we're going to get into it. Just off the top of your head, tell us the biggest left turn that your scripts took at one point, because you said that you rewrote it from scratch a few times. Tell us a version that never made it to the screen, but for a while, maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month, you were thinking this is the version that it's going to be.
You know what? I actually always think, even from the, maybe not from the first script, but from the second script, I think one would always recognize it as the same movie, actually. But I mean, the very first draft was much more centered around Layla, the girl. And it was really centered on this girl who escaped from trafficking and then ended up coming to a truck stop. But she ended up in a foster family, but then she fled that foster family. I can't even remember, but it was focused on her. In the very, very first draft I had, it was focused on the girl. And I mean, the final story is also focused on her because it's very much a two-hander. But the first one, there wasn't a truck driver, and it was a story about this girl who escaped.
It was Schrader's suggestion of the truck driver that forever changed it.
Yeah, I mean, it was going in the direction of finding a partner, finding someone for her to team up with. So that was happening.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's why I am, Paul Schrader is in the special thanks in the credits for sure.
I'm curious when you decided to have Layla kill Paul in the beginning, because I could easily see that as something that, Sally, Juliette Binoche's character, does, but it really is a shocker out of nowhere that, she has a gun and she kills this guy that she knew that she was possibly going to be trafficked to. We hadn't seen the scene play out between Sally and Paul and what was going to happen, but it's a good shock. And I'm curious when it crossed your mind to have Layla, a 10, 12-year-old girl, just grab this double barrel shotgun and kill him.
Before I started writing the first draft, I made this little short movie called A Light Above, which is kind of a similar character to Layla, a girl who escapes from a basement where she has been held captive.
Okay.
And she shoots her captor. So already there, I had this thing of kind of a little girl going to a violent place in order to get out of captivity. So that was with me from before, and actually even in the first draft. And then as this kind of sort of story changed a bit, but already then, as soon as I had this first draft with the truck driver and with kind of that storyline, already from then it happened this same way. That's actually been there. And and I think that, when I found that, that's when I think I felt like this story that, I feel like they're always, when you write something, it's when you find certain elements that makes you feel like, okay, this story really can become a good story. And that was one of the elements. And it's not because of the gun, because I'm not big on kind of guns and that. And I don't know if you probably didn't notice, but in the movie, it's never portrayed that you never see a gun being fired in this movie.
I guess it is all off screen. Okay.
Yeah. You see the impact.
Yeah. And you hear it.
You hear it and you see the impact. So you see what the damage it does, but you never see a gun actually being fired. So you never have that sort of romantic shot of the person firing a gun. But I felt like, the strength in Layla, the strength in this victim was always very important to me. And I don't view them as victims, neither her or Sally, and I view them as survivors. And it's always important for me that characters are not portrayed as victims, because it just makes them less interesting when they become victims, because then we pacify them. Then we no longer say that they can be people who have an active role in their life. So having that moment in there just immediately defines that this movie has kind of no boundaries of what can happen.
Exactly.
And it makes the movie have an exciting drive from there, because you know that this movie can take you kind of anywhere.
You know, we have a problem here in America with this organization QAnon, which spreads misinformation, and they have continuously tried to accuse politicians, usually Democrats, of being human traffickers with absolutely no evidence. And, you know, they got a following for this for a while, but there was just there was no truth to it. There was no research. And I could tell that your film is very researched, because you're continually talking about Layla being lost in the system, you know, starting with foster care and how the system has let her down and how she escaped foster care. And now she's on this path, but she has her own reasons for not trusting the system, for not trusting police. What was your research like to get a honest grip on the human trafficking problem? I think your most poignant line of dialogue in the movie, which we've seen and heard in other movies, especially drug movies, is when, you know, Morgan Freeman is begging for help, but the government doesn't have the resources. And they said, look, ultimately, if we take these people down, they're going to be replaced. And at the end of the day, the problem is, as long as somebody's willing to pay for trafficking, we're going to keep finding new traffickers taking their place, which is really grim and sad. And I'm just curious, kind of the realism of the research that you went through to kind of get to that point and that viewpoint of the movie.
Yeah, my research has been very deep, you know, both into the trucking community and into the trafficking issues. And yeah, as long as people buy sex, trafficking will exist. Sex trafficking could end in 24 hours if no one ever bought sex anymore. So yeah, I mean, that's in a way, you can call it grim, but it could also be an inspiration, right? Because there's actually a very simple answer to the problem. So I mean, the research, you know, it started from talking with all of these truck drivers and kind of learning from that. And then obviously reading everything I could read, seeing every documentary I could watch, talking with trafficking advocacy organizations. And I have to tell you, you know, once the film was finished, because when you handle a topic like this, you obviously, you know, and at least for me, you know, research is important. And I want to respect the issue, and I want to respect the people who are involved in it and who are victims of it, everybody. At the same time, you know, you certainly can't encapsulate everything. And you know, you're also going to make mistakes or things you're not going to get quite right. So after the film was finished, there were 3 different trafficking organizations that viewed the film. And that was probably the most kind of nerves I had of anybody watching the film.
Could you tell us the names? Because it's just interesting to find out who the legitimate advocacy organizations are, right?
Yeah, well, so I could talk about one in particular, which is Truckers Against Trafficking, which have been doing wonderful, really amazing work. And since they started, there's been a huge change, and they managed to basically train truck drivers and law enforcement to really understand how to identify trafficking. And there's been lots of victims that have been identified and that have been saved because of the work they've done.
That's great.
So just to talk about them in particular, you know, what they said when they watched the movie is that, so they've been approached by many, many movies and TV series, etc., and they've never wanted to partner with any movies. And they wanted to partner with our movie. And they wanted to, you know, put their stamp of approval on our movie because they felt like there was an authenticity. And at the same time, they felt like it was an incredibly thrilling movie, and like that it wasn't an issue movie, but that it was a movie that just took it seriously and really had done its job, I guess. You know, they felt like I had done my job.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard about the movie, I expected, okay, she has a big truck. They're going to try and put a whole bunch of kids into the back of the truck. But no, it's really just one child at a time. The most kids we saw were in the van that, you know, was following them around here and there. But it really shows that realism of, you know, these people will do it one kid at a time. and just kind of sneak them in because it's that underground and terrible.
Yeah, and also how it happens around the corner from you, and
Right, the way that they were
and
renting the house in the
yeah,
residential neighborhood, and the neighbors
yeah,
didn't know what to think of it.
yeah, and the neighbors kind of didn't want to ask any questions and didn't want to knock on the door, like people. It's always easier to kind of look the other way, and I think a lot of people are really afraid of this topic because it is so horrifying. But actually, if we talked about it, then maybe it wouldn't be so horrifying anymore, because then maybe we would dare to make these small steps that are necessary to make it end. But then also, when it comes to research, I also had a guy in the FBI who I spoke with a lot and who was amazing. And I can't name him, unfortunately, because he's an active agent. But we would spend hours on the phone, and he would read the scripts, and he would come with suggestions for lines, and which many of them are still in there, either spoken by Cameron or Morgan. And that was also a great, when he also watched the movie, that he also was like, yeah, no, this is, it works. And for me, research is it's important. And it's important because it's important to respect. But it's also important because that's what makes good stories. And I kind of want to highlight that a little bit, because one can think, oh, it's just to respect, but is it really important to respect when the most important thing is the story? But it goes together. If you have, at least for me, if I really know this environment, I mean, talking with these truck drivers for hours and hours and hours, getting to know their stories, there's so much of that in the movie. And it just made the movie so much better. The same with the conversation with my FBI guy. It made those characters and those scenes and those interactions so much better. And it's real. He was like, yeah, that's how it is. And some of the silliest lines in there are literally things that he was like, yeah, one time I said this and he said that. And the same then also with the trafficking. I mean, everything in there about the traffickers and about what happens are things that are from different stories and from different accounts. And it just makes the story better.
Yeah, it gave an authenticity. I mean, even the authenticity when they go to the childhood home, with all the stuff stored there and the lights not, being on. So they're walking around with lanterns room to room. That was a great set too. But I want to talk really kind of about that scene, but what we learned through it, in which the antagonist in your film is this omniscient threat that's coming from different sources. It's the people in the van that are holding the girls in the house. Are they going to get to Sally and to Layla? And the threat that we can't see against presumably other people in prison against her brother Dennis, and she's doing it to kind of help him out. But then we learn that they had an abusive father, and that Dennis protected her from the father and took beatings for her and kept the father away from her. And that's kind of what set Sally on her path towards independence as well. It's interesting to find out that the secret antagonist in the movie is Dennis, in which he was trying to fake this handoff gone wrong in the end. But he was basically, if I understood it correctly, he was more than willing to traffic Layla for the money and just take the money and either be done, or maybe he was going to secretly do other trafficking work. At what point did you realize that her brother, who I think it's very interesting, had protected her from an abusive father, couldn't see himself as a person that could protect these innocent girls, that he was seemingly okay to traffic? Because it's a very strange antagonist, and again it kind of catches you off guard, oh wow, he's not a good guy like we thought he was. I mean, sorry, he's never a good guy, but he's not a guy trying to do the right thing.
His character goes into really, really deep psychology, and I with children who grow up with abuse, and they were both abused by the father, physically abused. It was only Sally who was sexually abused by the father. But children who grow up with abuse, some become survivors like Sally, who kind of refuse to break. But she has isolated herself and would kind of not become anything had she not met Layla. But Dennis is a broken person. He is actually truly a victim because he has been destroyed. His humanity has become destroyed. So he no longer knows what it is. He no longer knows what it feels like. The only thing he knows is that he loves his sister. But even that love is a codependent love. So it's only acknowledged through what he gets from her and what she does for him. I believe that in his crippled mind, he really loves his sister, and he really thinks that this is the best thing to do for her, because he doesn't have any way to make a living for them. But finding this thing of being able to traffic these girls sometimes, and as he says at the end of the movie, I wasn't going to do it for long. He doesn't feel anymore because he has become such a broken person. Because with children who experience really severe abuse, sometimes it only takes like one good person for a child in order for them to get on the right path. And sometimes it's a teacher, or it's a coach, or it can be anybody, or it can be a neighbor, or maybe sometimes it's even just someone walking by them on the street and being nice. Someone getting as destroyed as what Dennis is, that is actually the true tragedy of this story.
He was protecting his own sister from sexual abuse. And you're very subtle about how you insinuate the sexual abuse for Sally. It comes out clearest when Dennis has Layla get on the green dress that Sally was given on her 13th birthday. And her reaction to it is, pure rage. And almost acting like she thought that he would know better than to do that. And that's when we kind of realize, as a bit of foreshadowing before the scene that follows, that he is not a good guy. So it was interesting to see that. And it was, of course, you also well documented how it could go from the package being drugs to the package finally being a kid. So it's just crazy that decline is there in him when he, in his own mind, saw himself as a hero for protecting his sister from an abusive father, but somehow just cannot associate it's a problem to traffic these girls. I want to talk about editing for a second, which is the last stage of storytelling. What do you want to tell us about a deleted scene or something that you needed to learn about your movie in the editing room?
I love the editing room, by the way. I just love how that's when you write the final version of the movie, because that's when you actually have it as a movie. Because the script is nothing really. The script is just maybe a blueprint at best, but the script is not the final medium for a movie. So I love the editing room. I had a very good editor, Christian Siebenhertz. He's excellent and very good at dramaturgy and story as well. And we were really sparring through the process and really challenging the movie, challenging ourselves. The story has definitely remained, but there were sections where we moved things around. And I would say one of the most important things was that with Juliet and Halla's performances, we had to move around how the scenes worked on the progression of their relationship. And I'm not sure that that's something I could have secured in advance in the script, because I think it really came from their performance. It just had to be, some scenes had to be moved around because it just made the flow make more sense in how their relationship developed.
It's good that you're able to do that too. I mean, and have scenes that could be modular like that. So that's great.
And then obviously, shorten and tighten. There are a few deleted scenes on for people who buy the movie.
Any scene in particular you want to bring up that was tough to cut?
It was all tough to cut, but
sure.
You're so focused on what is the story, and you're always focused on what makes the story better. What makes the story better? But one thing that was a little sad, like there used to be a sequence actually where Sally met an old flame. An old boyfriend, the bar that she's at, in the script, she actually meets an old flame there, and they kind of reconnect for like a brief moment in time. And there is a lot of nice in it, but ultimately in that section in the script, there is so much happening.
Right.
That
she's getting drunk in that bar.
She's getting drunk, and Layla is, in a different place, and everything is coming together in this moment. All the three different storylines in the movie are converging at this moment. So it just became too much. It became too much to add this new character, even if it was just so slight. It became too much, but it was sad to cut him.
That makes sense. I guess the toughest question that I have for you is would Sally really be able to keep Layla? at the end of the movie. Of course, these kids are off the grid. They've fallen out of the system through foster care. As you see, her mom is dead. The trailer's gone when they go to visit her home. So it's clear that there's not a lot of people asking questions about her. But at the same time, there are FBI agents involved. And would Sally really be able to raise her? Because I would think that they would be at other truck stops just, not being pursued by crazy traffickers and probably get the eye of the law looking at them as well, kind of saying, hey, who's this girl in your truck? What's going on? So I was just kind of curious about that ending. Was it more fantasy, or could it be steeped in some reality?
So I spoke with my FBI about it, and he said, he was like, well, in this situation, but very important, the fact that Morgan's character is a consultant.
Right.
He is not an agent anymore. And he's also a wild card. He is someone who goes by his own rules. And he knows that the best thing for this girl is to be able to stay with this woman who has become her mother.
Sure, of course.
And so he knows that that's the best thing. So he decides to let them go. But I think, and actually in early scripts, I had that she adopted her and that we saw them afterwards in Florida with her having adopted her, and they kind of lived in a small house and she was going to start school. So in my mind, yes, Garrick lets them go there because he knows that if local law enforcement and if the bigger FBI gets involved, then the girl is going to have to be put in like a temporary foster home for a while Sally gets approved, and like a whole process.
It would take months.
So it would take months, and maybe she would never get approved because she doesn't have a home, So in my mind, he lets them go so that they can continue their life. And then at the same time, they will start a process with getting her legally adopted. So in my mind, Sally is going to legally adopt her.
That's great.
But in that moment, it's the right thing for him to do, to let them be together after this trauma they've been through, rather than splitting them up at this point. And as he says to, Cameron Monaghan's character, Cameron is great in this movie too. But as he says to his character, when Cameron, who is the agent, says that, okay, we're really going to get in trouble for this. He's like, well, I'm going to get in trouble. And, it's not your fault if this old guy does something crazy. So, yeah, so that's kind of...
It works. I was just curious about what other things that you would consider. I have two last big questions for you because I know we're running over time.
Yeah.
What was your toughest scene? What was your toughest scene on the page? The scene that you kept sweating over and over again, and how did you crack it? And then what was your toughest scene shooting?
The toughest scenes shooting were in the prison between Dennis and Sally at the beginning of the movie. But even tougher, the toughest was the longer scene in the childhood home between Dennis and Sally, because it's walking such a fine line with, I didn't want to reveal who he ends up revealing himself as. I had to make sure the audience doesn't get ahead of Sally. I also needed to feel how close they were and how much their relationship mean to each other, and also feel their codependency. So there were so many elements, and on such like a subtle, all of them quite subtle. So that was, I would say, the most challenging on the page, but also the most challenging to shoot. I mean, to find, and the most challenging to edit as well. What would you have thought? Which scene would you have thought?
No.
I'm just curious.
No right answer. I mean,
I know, but that would have been fun to hear. Like, what?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes
if there was a scene that.
Sometimes the strangest scenes are like the little scenes that people tell me that they were sweating, and I'm like, really, that scene? But that makes sense because that's the climax of your movie. So like you're leading up to your climax. I guess the production moment that really leapt out to me was when she sells her trailer. You were either using a huge crane to go alongside the truck as she's driving, or a drone that is flying with her and then up in the air a little. Like, what could you tell us about that moment when she's driving away after selling the truck and we're seeing, Sally through the window? Because that was a great shot. Yeah.
I mean, that's on like a version of a Russian arm, the sort of lower budget version of a Russian arm. It was a type of a motor crane that was attached to the top of a car.
Okay, it was on a car. That's how it was following.
Yeah,
because I couldn't figure out how it was following that close, but also moving. Because that was great.
No,
that was a great shot.
Yeah, I mean that shot and the fourth shot of the movie, the one where it also comes up like that. Those are with the motor crane on the vehicle.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah.
What could you tell us that you're working on next?
So I am in talks with a couple of projects, but I can't talk about them yet, unfortunately. But those are. It looks like the next thing I'll direct will probably be something I haven't written myself.
Okay.
And which I'm quite excited about, because I also really love kind of going into the work on someone else, and then hopefully I can contribute something that makes it the best it can be, or at least on its way there. And then I do also have a couple of projects that I have been writing, one with another writer, and that I also really love, but I know that I need some time with them that I haven't had to kind of make them click. One is about the Norwegian artist Edvard Munch, who everyone knows from the painting Scream.
Yeah.
That painting, who had an amazing life. And there we're developing this thing that's sort of hybrid animation and live action. And
that's cool.
It's going to be, and the writer I'm writing, she writes in this super light way. It's just so pleasurable. Like, she can write sort of these scenes that have such depth, but they're so light. And so that one I love. I just know that it needs to kind of take the time it needs in order to be great. And then another project that's of this heroic mother of 5 who saved several hundred prisoners during the war, which is also that's really great. Cool. Yeah.
Those sound awesome. And I hope you make them and we get to have another chat. Congrats.
I know.
Congrats on getting your first film in the can. Anna, thanks for being so generous with your time today. Thanks for coming down and chatting.
Yeah. No, thanks for asking great questions. It was really awesome to talk to you.
Well, thanks again for your time today.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Anna Gutto for being so generous with her time and discussing her debut feature film, Paradise Highway. And folks, it's in theaters and it's on VOD, so check your local listings so that you could finally watch it. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We just turned 10, folks. We lasted a decade, and we couldn't have done it without your support. And we just published our huge summer issue. It has Emmy contenders ranging from Stranger Things, Barry, Better Call Saul, Hacks, What We Do in the Shadows, and Station 11. We have actor Glenn Powell, who plays Hangman in Top Gun Maverick, talking about what it was like to be in that incredible film and his process. And, he's also a screenwriter. There's scripts to read in Backstory. There's also an interview with director John Carpenter on the 40th anniversary of The Thing. There's so many great pieces in our summer issue, and we're continuing to add to it. So it would be fantastic to have you as a subscriber. And of course, to sweeten the deal, if you want to subscribe now, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory. You just enter that code into the shopping cart at backstory.net, and it will give you access to both the iPad app and the website. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. That's right. These are Zoom interviews. So you could watch us have these discussions on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would really mean a lot to me to have you consider supporting my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2022. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to find me on social media, you could always find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter. You could also find those same accounts on Instagram. So Yo Goldsmith on Instagram or Backstory_mag on Instagram. You could check out our Facebook fan page, or you could even send us an email at backstoryletters@gmail.com. That inbox gets a little cluttered sometimes, so I apologize if I don't respond immediately, but I love hearing what folks have to say, and I promise you I will do my darndest to get to your message. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.